It's time to take command with former NFL tight end Logan Paulsen and former Commanders beat reporter Craig Hoffman.
Take Command podcast from Odyssey Sports. I'm Craig Hoffman. That is Logan Paulsen. All right, the other thing that we wanted to kick around, Logan, was Ron talking about what he learned last year trading down in the draft. And this is two-part. Trade down, what he learned. And also, we got a great question about trading up. We'll read that question in a second. But here was Rivera at the NFC Coaches Breakfast the other day.
And if we go backwards, how far can we go? And we were able to target a team we felt that was going to want to jump up, and it worked out that way. Martin did a terrific job with all that, looking into it and talking about it, setting up the trade. And the clump of players that we had, Marty, Eric, and Gribbs got up there, and we had a 5-man clump and just said, hey, these 5 guys we like. We had 3 receivers and 2 offensive linemen that were in that clump, and said, okay, if this guy there, that's our guy. And Jahan was sitting there looking at us.
And it worked out. Jahan Dotson seems to be a very, very good football player. So you have that on trading down. And then you got this message, which you forwarded on to me on your Instagram page, which you can follow Logan at Logan_Paulsen82. Said, thought I'd reach out with another potential question from the mailbag. Any chance the Commanders look to trade up in this year's draft? I know lots have been said about trading back, but you think there's a player the Commanders would look to move up a few spots to draft if they started to fall a bit? Could the point be made that because of the moves in free agency that they're in a good spot to move up because there isn't a huge drastic need at a specific position, and they could spare giving up a 3rd or a 4th round pick to get the guy they think is worth trading up for? I think they'd prefer to move back if possible, especially since this draft is deep at O-line and corner, but players like Peter Skoronski, Christian Gonzalez, and Devin Witherspoon really entice me if one of them falls a bit. What do you think? And I think these two things are very intertwined in terms of what you're looking for, how the buckets work, to go back to our last podcast, and how this team is built. So all of that, Logan, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I think let's just start with my personal draft philosophy. And I am of the mindset that there are very few players that I've ever evaluated, and I would do, kind of a pseudo, definitely top 10 tight ends, probably top 10 O linemen, maybe top 10 quarterbacks. When I was playing, even I'd watch all those guys, just because I really enjoyed the draft. I really enjoyed the process. So anybody that I've ever evaluated in the last 15 years, there's very few people that I would trade up for, right? Very few people. And usually it's a quarterback, right? Usually it's like a Trevor Lawrence. Andrew Luck was a guy that I was very, very high on when he was coming out. And I thought,
bold take on that one.
Yeah, right. But what I'm saying though, is there's a reason those guys are considered the next, John
generational
Elway or
prospect,
whoever, Peyton Manning, right? It's because you can give up a lot of players, a lot of resources, and they're going to change your franchise. So with regards to the players that he mentioned, Christian Gonzalez, big fan of his. Witherspoon might be my favorite player in the first round. I really enjoy watching him. Peter Skoronski is one of the most polished offensive linemen in the class. Paris Johnson, I think, has super freak upside in terms of having 36-inch arms. He's 6'7", he's 315. He moves like a much smaller man. He's twitchy. Those are exciting things, but to move up spots, you'll have to give up some draft capital, depending on how high you have to go. And is giving up, this is a good example. So last year, for example, in the trade down with New Orleans gives up essentially 2 other players and a first round pick. I think if you kind of look at the aggregate of what they gave up, and to me, no player is worth 2 players. So I don't care how good Chris Olave is going to be in his career. He could be a Hall of Famer for all I care. It seems unlikely that his value to the New Orleans Saints would outweigh the fact that we've got a starting running back and a starting receiver in that trade, and potentially a starting quarterback from one trade. So, and again, the reason that you always want to trade back, in my opinion, is because the draft evaluation is super subjective. I was having a conversation with a good friend who I respect a ton, and we could not come to a consensus on our top 10 offensive linemen. And we see football almost identically. And so why are there variations in how we see things? It's because I like something that he doesn't, or I overvalue something that he doesn't. And we can kind of get the same 10 players in the bucket, right? But we can't decide the order. So am I that confident in my evaluation that I'm willing to trade up, give away other opportunities to draft players, to draft a guy that is maybe not the best person, maybe not the best offensive lineman on some people's boards. And so that's something that I always go back to. It's a subjective process. Don't be overconfident in your draft evaluation. I love Witherspoon. I know, Craig, you like Witherspoon. Everyone loves Witherspoon, but there's a good chance that we miss on him for whatever reason. So why don't I trade back, draft Deonte Banks, take a shot at Matthew Bergeron in the second round with that extra pick I'm going to accrue, right? That just seems like good process. And I don't get one of the big names. I don't get Darnell Wright. I don't get Anton Harrison. I don't get DeJuan Jones, but I get a guy who's going to be a starting right tackle in the NFL, maybe left tackle with some swing ability, and I get a starting corner, right? Instead of just getting one player. And I always go back to that as draft process. And we can talk more about the buckets and the 5 players he was talking about last year, but I just think that's always something I go back to. 2 players are more valuable than one.
It's hard to argue with, but I'm going to try it. I'm not even just being devil's advocate.
Yeah, go for it.
This team specifically is missing blue chip players. You can make an argument they haven't drafted one since Ron's been here. Their best players are all the guys they inherited. Terry, who happened to be a 3rd round pick, John, Duran, Montez, all like those are probably their best players. Their 4 best. Tressway, obviously.
Cam Curl, I mean, they drafted him.
Yeah, Cam I think is probably pushing that list. He might be the guy to break through. I think if you want to rate Cam Curl ahead of Montez Sweat, I'll even hear you on that. With how effective Curl has been in terms of where their defense is with and without him. I'll hear Cam Curl. But even Cam, like, is he pushing all pro? No. Like the only guys that are pushing that are John and Terry and I guess Duran, and they just don't have that. And like, as someone who watched and covered Trent Williams and saw the difference he made, you obviously played with Trent and you see the difference he made. If you think you have that, and especially if like that guy starts to fall and you're not talking about going from 16 to 7, you're talking about going 16 to 12. I don't think that's crazy. Now,
so I'm glad you brought that up. I think that's a really good point. And I think it's important to look at this class specifically. Like last year.
Yes. Well, that was what I was going to say too, is this class is a little hard to make that argument, but correct. Continue.
Yep. Yeah. So I think we're on the same page. Like this year, there are some very good football players that are going to help your team, right? But you don't have necessarily these players with the same kind of upside, for example, right? Witherspoon's a guy that, again, that name gets throws around, but compare him to Sauce Gardner, and my evaluation's way higher on Sauce Gardner, right? And he's a little undersized. He's like 185 pounds, 179 pounds, something like that. Heck of a football player, but in terms of traits and qualities and projection, there's still some question there, right? Lucas Van Ness only played 400 snaps his whole college career, right? I think he's going to be a good pro, and he could have some more upside than people want to give him credit for, but it's not Aiden Hutchinson. It's not, some of these rushers that were drafted early in last year's draft. And I think that that's important to kind of acknowledge that this year specifically, kind of like last year was similar in this way, very deep draft, but the top wasn't very high. Compare this draft to the draft 2 years ago with like Kyle Pitts, Jamar Chase, Penei Sewell, like that draft. Yeah, man, Micah Parsons in that draft, right? Think about the difference in composition and the difference in narrative around those guys coming into the draft. It's drastically different. So I do think this year specifically, I'm really glad you brought this up, Craig. There's not that dude. There's guys that are good, very good, but there's not that guy that you're like, this is Sauce Gardner. He's going to be a baller, right? This is, the tackle from NC State last year, Ike Ekwonu, right? There was guys that were just a little bit better physically. You turn on the tape and you were like, damn. Like, so Paris Johnson, let's talk about him for a second. I love his upside. But when you watch him, there is a rawness and an immaturity to his game that still needs to be parceled out. And so do I think it can get done? Absolutely. But there's not the surefire kind of yes of some of these other guys that were in the draft last year, right? There's some development. Skoronski's the same way. He's 6'4", he's 315. He looks like a guard. Is he going to play guard or is he going to play tackle? Drafting a guard in the top 10 is not a bad thing, but the positional value, like we've talked about before, is not necessarily there, right? So I do think that that's important to acknowledge in this specific conversation.
Right. So I stand by my point that if you think there's an absolute blue chipper that is at a position that you need on your football team and your football team is otherwise well built and perhaps you even have an extra third round pick that you can afford to part with because it's a comp pick or whatever the reason, that it's not unsound strategy. The problem for the 2023 NFL draft is good luck selling me on a specific example where that's going to be true in this draft. Like, unless Jalen
outside
Carter,
of quarterback, or
well,
Jalen Carter,
I was
right?
gonna say, if
That's a good.
Jalen Carter starts falling, well, for this team, Jalen Carter, like, you just signed
But
Payne.
that's a good point though. It's that type of player, the guy that's the best player in the class
Right.
or a quarterback is going to
Right.
fall down. Let's say for example, Anthony Richardson starts to slide. Do you take a shot on that? That's the type of player you trade up for. And I'm not even that high on Anthony Richardson, but just to give you some type of context, like
Mm-hmm.
that's what you're. Will Anderson, for whatever reason, starts to take a little bit of a slip. He
Yeah.
won't, but if he
No.
does, then yeah,
Sure.
make a move. You know,
But the point that you're making specific to this draft is like, let's say you do love Christian Gonzalez. Do you
right?
really love him that much more than, Emmanuel
Deontay Banks,
Forbes?
Emmanuel Forbes,
Yeah, Deontay Banks,
like
all these guys. Like the next tier, if Witherspoon and Gonzalez is our A's, those good dudes are A minuses, B pluses.
right. I
And
think
at
that's a good
that
point.
point, is B plus another B plus later in the draft at a position you might like, that third round pick that you trade could be your starting center next year and could be an all pro in the future because that's
Right,
how this positional value is for centers. And so
right.
if you give up future Jason Kelsey for the chance to draft Devin Witherspoon, you've lost. And again, like the Olave thing is so great because, Olave might be awesome for the Saints, but is he going to be, we don't even know if he's better than Dotson. And
Right.
two, he's definitely not going to be better than, what was it, Dotson, Brian Robinson,
Brian
and
Robinson
potentially
and
Sam Howell.
Sam
Like
Howell, right.
that's the trade. It was Chris Olave for Jahan Dotson, Brian Robinson, and Sam Howell. That is a
Right.
wild win for the Commanders if Howell is your starter for the next couple of years. And even if he's not, it's still a win for the Commanders because Dotson might be better, period. And you also have Brian Robinson.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly right, and I think especially with this year's draft, like we just talked about, like I'm glad you brought up center. Like you're going to get three guys at center in the second round, probably. Maybe one makes it into the first, who are starting caliber football players, and they're going to come in day one and be ready to go. And that's not. I'm not exaggerating. Like that's how good they are, right? I mentioned,
Right.
I mentioned Matthew Bergeron. Like he will probably be close to available at 48, and he is a close to start. He's very close. He's probably like a B minus C plus type of player right now with B plus upside. So again, like don't go crazy. I know that's kind of the initiative is like, oh, let's go crazy, let's trade up, let's be overconfident in our evaluations. But man, it's as much as I like Christian Gonzalez, like I think he's awesome and I would love him to be here. I love Paris John. I love any one of those guys. Even a guy like Lucas Van Ness, I'd love it if he was here in Washington. But I don't love it enough to say I'm that confident in this evaluation with this particular player. Like there's certain guys you watch, right? Like Sauce Gardner, and I was like, and you talk to people and you can feel the consensus, and you're like, okay,
Yeah. This
maybe I
dude's
would trade
sick.
up for that guy. But this year, there's too many dissenting opinions. It's too confounding. It's very muddy. I'm going to increase my opportunities for success and draft back. The other thing I want to talk about is the buckets that he's talking about. So
Right.
there's three. He said there was three receivers and two offensive linemen. I think if I was going to guess, I think
Yeah.
Trevor Penning for New Orleans was one of them,
Mm-hmm.
right? Who was drafted. He didn't play at all last year because of an injury. And then Kenyon Green from the Houston Texans would have been the other guy. I think
Who
who I would
got
have put.
absolutely dump trucked. he does not ever want to see a Commander's uniform again in his life.
That's right. And then for receivers, it's
Jahan.
it's Jahan, Traylon Burks maybe, and then who was the other guy that year that was
So my guess it would have been like Olave could have been in that mix, and then
in that
Drake
tier, yeah.
London from Atlanta was the guy that everyone said they were in love with. But like, was
But
he in a
to me, that's
separate bucket above
that's a
those
separate bucket.
guys?
I think it's a separate bucket. So like, I think this is assuming that after they. No, I think so. What I would say is that it's Olave, Jahan, and Burks are the three receivers he's referring to, right?
Yeah.
And so if assuming that's correct, then basically your analytics guy would say, well, you can trade down 2 spots, probably 3, and still get one of the receivers you want and probably one of the offensive linemen you want. And doesn't it feel like that's exactly what happened, right?
Totally. And if they liked Jahan better than Olave anyway, then it's like, cool.
Yeah.
It's a little harder to do when it's like, these guys are basically the same, but we really actually like
Right.
we like Olave better than Dotson. Well, if it's like, well, we like Dotson better. Yeah. Who you guys trying to trade up for?
Yeah.
Olave? Yeah. Like we can make that
Cool.
happen. Let's look at the chart. This is what it costs. Done and done. All right, cool. We'll tell the commissioner,
But that's
we'll
something
tell the
we've
league.
talked but that's something we've talked about before. And like if you've put them in the same tier, you have to be okay
Right.
with they're all equal. They're not all equal,
Right.
1 to
Because
1,
like
but
obviously
they're
they like Dotson better than Burks because they took
right.
Dotson.
Right, but it's close enough. You know what I'm
Right.
saying? That you
Right.
can't be mad about any of them. And I think that's something that is for fans. Like I was talking to someone at work today and he was like, "Oh yeah, when I do like thinking about it in tiers totally changed the way I think about drafts." Because I was like, "Well, who are you drafting?" And it's fantasy football has screwed people up because they have a list and they just go down, right? But that's not how drafting works, right? Because like you're going to get to a point where two guys are on roughly the same thing, different positions. How do you compare them, right? So I do think this is it's pretty interesting, and
Yeah.
it's kind of fun to think back on that.
Yeah. I guess I should probably start preparing some buckets for next week. Although
Well, I
it's
mean, it's like for you guys. I was thinking about it. Like, would you need buckets for that?
for a mock
Probably
draft.
not. Yeah,
No.
unless you've
I'm
got a
gonna
lot
have
of people.
no. Well, the other thing too is like the buckets are gonna look a little bit different based off team needs and all that kind of stuff. I'm not doing a mock bucket. Like we're not gonna pick teams that we're drafting for ahead of time, and then I'm not gonna do the prep for all the buckets. I'm gonna kind of look at who's available and what their
And
team needs are, and not do something dumb for the teams that I wind up drafting for.
right, yeah, we're doing that next week, right?
I
The
think
mock
so. I
draft
think
thing,
that's the plan. How
dude. I was
mad?
gonna.
By the way, you have to pick for the Commanders. The internet will be so mad if I'm the one doing the pick.
Well, no, dude. We'll talk about each pick. So you'll pick, but we'll kind of digest each pick. I think that's how we should do it.
Oh, we.
You
Oh,
know what I'm
okay.
saying?
So we're GM head coach on each team.
Yeah, I think we could do that.
Who's the GM? Who's the head coach?
Well, I don't know, Craig. I'm probably the I don't know, man. It's a relationship that is, we're equals in the decision making
Okay.
process. So
Okay.
the title doesn't matter.
Okay. That was very diplomatic of you. Thanks for watching this clip of Take Command. First, why don't you like it? It lets other people know that it was good, and then they should watch it too. And Logan, we have a new exclusive home for full episodes.
We do 1067 The Fans YouTube page. Go check it out and please subscribe.
Yeah, do what Logan said.
Do
He's
it.
very, very smart.